Um, Hi Lil. This is like a quite chilly night, but like this campfire looks really nice, and it kind of reminds me, looking at the stars, for example, um, about the Wikimedia universe in a way, and how it all fits together, and like how all the stars align or do not align in this environment. So maybe we should talk about this a bit more.
Well, absolutely, Philip. It's a gorgeous night for this, and the setting could not be better for diving into our conversation today about the Wikiverse and where everyone stands or doesn't. Tonight might just be the perfect time to give everyone a casual overview of the Wikiverse and the efforts that have been put into setting up this Wikiverse, and of course, the much discussed 2030 strategy process. So, for anyone who's just joining us, this is a primer episode which we will reference in future at the beginning of other episodes. In our conversation today, we will be explaining the basics of Wikimedia and the international strategy work that is happening in this space. Also, another heads up for anyone just tuning in, what we're sharing is our own personal thoughts and our experiences and all of the stories passed on to us in this vibrant movement by amazing people who have been a part of the movement for way longer than I have personally, maybe even longer than Philip has. Our conversation is laid back. It is not exhaustive. It is definitely not academic. And we're here to enjoy the fire and explore the intriguing world of the Wikiverse.
So, and also to this point, obviously, like on Wikipedia, check your sources. That means like we might say things that we have researched to the best of our knowledge, or that we know and might be misremembering. So we will be offering quite a few show notes for this podcast to then also give you like the resources to read up on the things that we're talking about. And you shouldn't necessarily believe us, but you might be able to believe the links that we reference. And with that, maybe we should start by introducing ourselves here. So why don't you start, Agnes?
Sure, I can do that. So I began my career in media and investigative journalism back in the early 2000s. And then after that, I shifted towards social impact work, where I dove head on into the international development space around 2015. And in that time, I've done a lot of work that usually is at the intersection of designing development systems and products for impactful change in the world, that we see often engaging with institutions that hold power or with development organizations that are trying to impact underrepresented communities across the world. My first introduction to the Wikimedia movement was somewhere around 2016, 2017, where I was part of a social impact consulting firm at the time that had been brought on to conduct some of the initial design on the movement strategy. It gave me the opportunity to connect with Wikimedians and gain some deep insights from an outsider's perspective, of course, but yet feeling very connected to the core of the movement and seeing firsthand the passions and the belief that people have in the free knowledge movement and how important it is. And then by 2021, I joined the foundation, starting out as a contractor and then later moving to a full time role. I began on the movement strategy team and then transitioned to the community resources team, which is part of the community growth team that is also part of the bigger department called enhancement. I've attended numerous conferences, the Wikimedia Summit, the Wiki Women's Camp, Wikimania, and I've had a lot of opportunities since to engage with community members, but also support a lot of strategy sessions and a lot of strategy conversations as well. It has been quite a journey for me. It has been enriching and enlightening in many ways. What's your story, Philip?
Thank you, Yop. So my name is Philip Kopetsky. I'm originally from Vienna in Austria in Central Europe, and I've been editing Wikipedia since 2005, so for quite a long time. And I got involved like in national Wikimedia discussions projects like in 2013, so quite a while later. Also been to, since 2015, to most of the Wikimanias and Central and Eastern European meetings that happen every year, except for when Glaneur was happening. And I was a board member of Wikimedia Austria from 2016 to 20. Also was part like in the strategy process that you helped prepare. I was part of the community health working group that wrote some recommendations about how to tackle health in the community and like how to make it more resilient and less like toxic in a way. And we might at some point get to the discussion on like what of those recommendations is left, for example, and how they were like implemented in certain ways. I was also part of the SimpleXG committee from 2018 to 2021. And that SimpleXG committee was in charge of looking at all the annual plans from affiliates that had a budget of less than $100,000. But it was a global committee, so obviously, like me judging Cote d'Ivoire annual plan is not going to work very well, and that's kind of like also one of the reasons of why the strategy process is so important. After I started as a board member of Wikimedia Austria, I started as a steering committee member on the C Hub, which together with some other people I've been planning and implementing for the last 4 years. So yeah, that's kind of me.
You have such a
Sorry.
rich background, Philip. I'd like to learn a little more about, some of what else you do outside of the Wikiverse, but maybe not for today's conversation.
That's probably a different conversation, yeah.
Yes. But for the conversation today, I'm really excited to just dive into things and get a good lay of the land for our movement at the moment, the parts, the pieces, how they fit together, how they don't fit together. I'm sure in future episodes, as we continue to discuss, we'll exchange some more insights and understanding and experience about how things function within our movement and perhaps even compare with how things work in other movements, but learn and share what makes each one of us or different groups successful. But for now, Philip, let's start with the basics, shall we? Help us understand what the Wikimedia movement is all about. How do all the different parts and pieces fit together? Sometimes it feels like we're in our own corners and we just see the little bit that we do. And maybe if we just get a good lay of the land, step back a bit, we might see the bigger picture.
Yeah, let's start climbing a mountain if you want to use that figure of speech.
Perfect.
I mean, as a forewarning, like if you ever come across someone who thinks or says they understand and know everything about what goes on in Wikimedia, I would not trust a person for a second. But we can start like digging into it in a way. So we can first start with the Wikimedia projects that are hosted by the Wikimedia Foundation. We have the Wikimedia project like Wikipedia, Wikimedia Commons, and Wikidata, and other great projects that are edited and like maintained and run by volunteers all across the world in many different languages. These like projects or like the platforms are hosted by the Wikimedia Foundation that is situated in San Francisco in California in the United States. The reason they are in the United States has some legal reasons for most in terms of like free speech and also not having to necessarily be responsible for the content being put by other people on your servers. So far, like this framework has worked very well. We'll see how it will work in the future, if there might be changes to that. And the Wikimedia Foundation is run by donations, or like finance donations, either small or big donations. And it's in charge of like all the infrastructure that runs these projects all across the world. Different server farms across the world that they also maintain. And yeah, that's kind of like the basic setup. Where it becomes more complicated is like, so what outside of like this like simple task of like running, well not simple, but like very like focused task of like running servers and letting people edit is the whole thing. And we'll get to the Wikimedia Foundation in a second, but other components also like factor into this. Is like there are like affiliates that are affiliated with the Wikimedia Foundation and are able to like use the Wikimedia and Wikipedia trademark, for example. But those affiliates like are located in multiple countries around the world. I'm not even sure how many, but there are quite many by now. And these affiliates like support the local communities that they have in the like either country or region, and also, for example, do partnerships with other organizations to get that content onto Wikipedia or Wikimedia Commons or Wikidata or other projects. And they kind of offer like the ground support for volunteers who might need some support in terms of resources, like either like material or equipment or like books or connecting them with other people who might be working on the same thing. So they kind of serve a supportive function in many ways. There are exceptions to this, of course, and not every like affiliate sees the job the same way, but that's the general tendency of affiliates. We also have like-minded organizations that like OpenStreetMap, for example, and the Open Knowledge Foundation that work in a similar direction in terms of like open knowledge and like making knowledge accessible. And we also have, of course, like the readers and the consumers of the content and the information that is put on the Wikimedia projects. So that's kind of a general overview of like the different groups that like are involved in Wikimedia. But I think we should go more into detail about the different groups, and I think maybe we should start with the Wikimedia Foundation.
Right. Sure. Let's take a look at the Wikimedia Foundation. But thank you, Philip. That was a really interesting picture that you've painted, different parts and pieces, how they function, why they function, and who they serve. Was interesting to listen to. In our movement, every time you hear something, you learn something new. I learned that a long time ago, and I just always appreciate the constant learning. Yeah. Right. So maybe we can, I can share about the Wikimedia Foundation and where things are at the moment. Now, inside of the foundation, the organization is structured into a number of departments that handle different parts of the work. Some of the work is community facing, and some of the work is not very much community facing. For instance, the people and culture department, that team focuses on the hiring and shaping the workplace and the culture in the workplace. Typically not very community facing unless you're a community member who has applied for a job or vacancy at the foundation. And then product and tech, that department is potentially a department that you engage with on specific things, but you feel them and you see them through the results of their work. But they ensure that the technical infrastructure is well maintained and it continues to run and operate effectively, and they continue to manage that. There's the office of the CEO. That office is staffed with a number of folks who support the CEO in managing and ensuring that the day-to-day operations run smoothly, and that help keep the coordinated strategy on course. Then there's the legal department. In the legal department, potentially community members have connected with them in some way or another, especially if you've been part of the governance conversations, because you've then most likely engaged with folks in the community resilience and sustainability team, who have been leading and driving the governance conversations on Movement Charter. and Universal Code of Conduct. Also, in the legal department, you've probably, if you've made a report somewhere, somehow to trust and safety, then you've connected to someone in the legal department. So it's not just about trust and safety that some people might know, but they also provide legal support and protections for community members who are facing um, difficult times potentially in their countries, especially in countries where the freedom of expression is not always guaranteed. Then, of course, the Finance and Administration Department, which manages finances, keeps the books, tracking funding for the movement. And in the Finance Department, there's the grants administrators that potentially you've connected with. And the grant administrators support with grants contractual processes and ensure that those who are receiving money from the foundation are able to receive that on time in their local currency and with as little hassle as possible. Then we have the communications team, which is potentially the most visible department at the foundation. The internal communications team, you see their work more than you see them. But then the external communications team, often engages with communities in their own language. It is comprised of a number of facilitators and community and regionals who work within separate regions. Then you have the advancement team, which is the advancement department, which is the department that I'm a part of. There are two big blocks in that advancement department, the fundraising block and the community growth block. In community growth, you have the community resources team, the partnerships team, and the programs team. All of these teams, as communities, you probably have talked to one or two of my colleagues here and there, and you see us a lot at conferences and at events as well. So each department has small teams that are dedicated to delivering on specific tasks and ensuring that everything runs smoothly.
That sounds like a lot of people, Yop. Maybe to like give a little context also to the history of the foundation a bit. Like, it was created or founded in 2003, and has continuously been growing since about 2007. And just to give you an idea, today, in 2024, according to the website, they have 700 employees. And even 4 years ago, that number was about 400. So you can kind of get a sense of how also in the last few years, based on decisions that weren't made, the foundation has grown a lot. And that's why we also see a lot more people around that are kind of working for the Wikimedia Foundation. In terms of the committees, so what the foundation does is it has committees that make this prepare decisions that then the board of trustees has to accept. So it's not like the committees themselves have the power to decide certain things. For example, the affiliation committee that everyone knows as AFCOM is a committee that has the purview to recognize, de-recognize, and kind of nothing really more than that. It's de-recognize or recognize affiliates. And over the years, because there was no other body that, for example, dealt with conflict management between affiliates, all of that wanted to AFCOM. These committees are made up of volunteers, so you also have a limited time resource available to manage all those decisions. And these volunteers meet on a regular basis to discuss applications for recognition of communities as affiliates, and also handle issues if they have time to do so. AFCOM is probably the most impactful one in terms of the organized Wikimedia parts. There's also the language committee, which has been around for a very long time, that manages and handles the language versions of Wikimedia projects. So, for example, if someone wanted to create a English Wikiversity site, it would first go like into an incubator to see like if it's a viable project, and then at some point the language committee would decide like, yes, this is actually a viable project, and move it from the incubator, which is like a non-visible like part of like the Wikimedia service, to a visible part. So like for example, Google can find it then. And this language committee has been around for a long time. Obviously has quite a few far-reaching decisions to make. And those are kind of like two that have the biggest impact on what you probably do. The other committees that are not as visible and not as impactful, and we'll probably get around to them at some point, but for now, like for the prime episode, I think this is as good as it's as much as you probably need to know right now. There is, though, one other interesting development that has happened in the last 4 years, I think. And those are the regional grants committees, Johan, because that's in your ballpark. I think I'll just throw it over to you for that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Committees. 4 years ago, the regional grant committees were created. First of all, what are the regions within are with the political the are they political regions, Philip? Would we call them political? I don't think they are, though. But
Geographical regions is
geographical
probably a
region.
better term. But
Okay.
like geography determined by people in the grants team 4 years ago. So it's the same as the like when you ask yourself in Wikimedia like why something is as it is, it's usually because someone a long time ago with maybe good knowledge of the situation decided that it's the way, and that just stuck.
And that's stuck. Okay. So regional grants committees, we have 8 regions in our movement. There's the Latin America and Caribbean, North America region, Europe. In Europe, we have the Western Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. That's ESEAP. And then we have Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, and North Africa region as well. But the regional grants committees have a responsibility and play a really critical role in reviewing applications. They help determine who gets funded within their respective regions based on an allocated budget. And each one of in each of these 8 geographic regions that we focus on, often very interesting conversations come up when the grants committees are discussing. For example, when a committee decides to partially fund an organization, say half of what they've requested, while fully funding another smaller organization, questions arise about why that decision was made. You might find that the grants committee partially funded the organization because they thought that they were stronger. But then the dilemma that brings us to is, should those decisions appreciate or recognize the value of those affiliates and the value that they bring to the movement, and that they be funded based on their value? Or should they be funded based on an understanding that they are strong enough to find alternative sources of funding? It is a bit complex because even if an affiliate can find funding somewhere else, they might have budgeted for complete funding to leverage the additional resources that are coming. So there are some types of challenges that usually regional grants committees discuss, and they need to weigh these decisions sometimes, not only on the financial strength of the organization, but hopefully that we shift to making these decisions based on the contributions of this organization or this affiliate to the movement. Again, topic for future discussions, and when we go into that in subsequent episodes.
Yeah, and I think it's like an interesting philosophical discussion, like like how fundraising is done, and obviously there's been like a lot of discussion in the past about that, and also like the grants committees are like selected by the foundation, like there's no voting process, so there's also like people are unhappy that like there's no debate about like what the people, like who the people are on the committee and like what kind of people we're looking for example. There's also like a distinct lack of people on an international level who understand enough to like make those decisions in the first place. But I think like maybe this podcast and like other initiatives that have been happening in the last few years, like have like maybe helped like close this gap. Yeah. I mean the basic hope of the regional committees was like that decisions would be made closer to the people affected by it, which is like one of the key recommendations in a way, like devolving power and decision making to a level that is as close to the people affected by it as possible. So
Right.
thankfully now you don't have like people from like North America deciding about grants like in Indonesia, for example, where they
Right.
don't know like even what the situation is, like what volunteerism looks like in Indonesia, and like how an organization in Indonesia functions in that society. This isn't an example, but because it might have come up in the past that the people needed a like a nation like meeting to even understand like what Indonesia is about.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of like need to understand, and I think I need to listen, and I think maybe this podcast can also help with that.
Yeah.
So where do we go next, Job?
Well, I'm looking forward to our future discussions and our future
Yeah.
conversations. In this podcast, we've, I think, touched on a few things, and we have some questions that hopefully we'll be able to bring other colleagues and partners in future podcasts to help shed a little more light on or brainstorm with us where possible, because you can't help but think about the future when you're talking about a movement, and a movement as big and as massive as this. The last thing we want to happen is for the movement to become obscure in the future, because knowledge will always be relevant, knowledge will always be important. But there's a way that the world is shifting, and there are ways in which knowledge is consumed that is also shifting. And hopefully, in our future discussions, we'll talk about those shifts and adjustments that would potentially help us internally to create the structures that run and function together that would help us, continue to move with the world and, yeah, and make the right changes and shifts as we go and build the right
Mhm.
structures in that space. But I'd love to hear more about some of the historical things. As they say, until you know your history, you can't fully shape your future, no? So we'll go front and back in our discussions, and I'm looking forward to subsequent episodes on this, Philip.
Yeah, it's kind of like while we're not going like, into full history modes in this primary episode because it will come up like within the conversations anyway. I'm not sure like Job, if you want to talk about the strategy process itself, like in a brief overview in terms of like how it came to be and like where we are right now. At least it's like as of May 2024.
I would think that you have more more of that history and background than I do, but I can share a bit of what is my understanding. I always like to use an analogy, I
Well,
think.
to be fair, like you was involved in the process way before I was. Like if you were like in preparation phase, then maybe that's
Oh,
where we could start with like talking about the strategy process.
okay. Yeah, I guess I could. For me, it was an outsider's perspective. My recollection of that time may not be fully accurate. But
I can always add to that afterwards.
okay. But can I use an analogy? Because for me, an analogy helps me paint a better picture.
My guess.
Okay. So my understanding of how the process began was that as a movement, we had done so much. We had started to see the impact of the work of the movement in the world. And we, in our different spaces and places and The things and the issues that we started to realize were things that we needed to find ways to collectively address. Um, we came to a very ripe point in our movement where we said we need to ask ourselves good questions about how we work together more collectively. So here's my analogy. In that thinking, we created vast land. We created a massive piece of land and we said to ourselves, okay, we need to develop this massive piece of land that then shapes and forms how we grow as a community. And so, in this massive piece of land, we were smart. We said we have a lot of experience and expertise and knowledge in our movement. Why don't we bring all of that together and ask people, how do we design this massive piece of land? How do we design our community? And that is how we started discussing movement strategy. And the conversations came together. We decided that this massive piece of land would have different areas and sectors. One area where we will build our secretariat and think of that as, equity, governance, and all of that work. And another area where we're going to build our academic institutions, think of that as the recommendation for capacity building. And another area that is our innovation center, in innovating and learning and knowledge management. And so we had all of these different parts and pieces and phases on this massive piece of land. It's now constructed, and we've sort of brought people together and created and designed what our community is going to look like, or what our shared agreements across the community. And we discussed that we would leverage all of our different experiences, because in our movement we have the academics and the professors, we have the builders, and we have the laborers, we have the thinkers that will continue to design, we have architects and electricians, and we have plumbers, and we have the children who do need to use that playground, and we have the folks who love recreation, and so the park is going to be used, and we have the folks who just enjoy working at the bank, because yes, we have a bank in this massive piece of land and community. And so that is, for me, how the movement started to come together. And over time, if you ask me today what my picture is of this piece of land, we're still building. I think we're still building. There are many places that are still under construction. There are places where construction began and we just have the foundations and not much work has been done. There are places where the structure is fully built and now we need to start thinking about the fittings and the furniture that goes into that. And then there are certain places that are still just land and we haven't done much work there. So we are still a community in growth, which means that movement strategy is still a massive construction site. That's my analogy.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, like this process has been going on for 7 years now. So like we also have, and like there was a strategy process before this strategy process, which is almost like the not the ruin. That would be too strong a word with your analogy, but definitely like a layer that like the current strategy is based on, and the current like buildings are based on. I think like the problem in 2016, 2017 was like the relationship between the affiliates and the foundation was getting better than it used to be. Like there was a really bad time in 2011 when it was like there was huge conflict between affiliates and the foundation. That kind of like teetered up, like kind of got better once Catherine Mayer became the ED of the Wikimedia Foundation. But there was a sense of like the system that we had at this point, like the structures, the infrastructure that we had was not adequate to like achieve the goals that we had like as a global community. And that kind of like brought us to the point where we like needed to make this whole process like fair in a way, like more equal, bring in equity in terms of like supporting communities and affiliates around the world that hadn't had a chance so far to take part. And I think when you measure it in certain ways, it definitely has been a success. Like we have way more affiliates like that have a like an annual plan, like which means they have planning processes in place and like have an organization that is resilient enough to support that. So like at the like the kind of like the bottom layer of this like strategy log or this like ecosystem is kind of working in a way. Where it becomes more difficult is when we get into decision making, because decision making is often tied to like power and money, and those two things are heavily interlinked and still reside like a lot of the Wikimedia Foundation. And over the last 7 years, like we've written a lot. We've written recommendations that kind of illustrate how devolving power can work or should work, which the Wikimedia Foundation Board of Trustees has agreed to in principle. You can always read the recommendations that were finalized in March 2020, so like right at the beginning of the pandemic. You can read those recommendations in a way where like everything is centered in the foundation still, but just like evolved within the foundation, which is a legitimate way of seeing it. So I think like in the spirit of like what we're trying to do with Strategos, it was always there to like trust, like hand out trust to communities, like give them the tools to like manage themselves and just be one happy family that like is like dependent on each other, but like not being necessarily like controlled from like a central instance. Getting to like, and we now have like a situation in 2024 where we are like agreeing on a movement charter, which kind of hints at those things that I just talked about. But then there's also a strong reaction against that, and we'll probably get that into that like in the first actual episode.
Right.
Within the analogy, like I think there's still like a lot of tension between different neighborhoods and the central piece of the landscape, and it's definitely something we still need to work on. And there are like other neighborhoods that look really nice and really pretty, kind of symbolize like what this process should be about, and we'll probably get to that as well. But it still needs a lot of convincing and talking, I think, in terms of like making everyone understand like what this hopefully should all be about. Because yeah, we'll see probably like some of the guests might be like less optimistic about things than others, like other and many like I've been in the strategy process since the beginning, and it's been like 7 years now, essentially, like since Wikimedia 2017.
Right.
And people's patience is running low, and like the frustration is running out. So yeah, we'll get to all of that. Yeah. Is there anything else we should talk about in this primer episode?
Well, I think we have covered most of the basics for today. And
Great.
yeah,
Cool. So this is the primer episode of a podcast that doesn't have a name yet. We haven't really
it's our
decided on a name
own
yet.
podcast for now. It's just our
So
strategy podcast, maybe.
we'll see what the name is. You'll probably hear it in the first episode, but yeah, stay tuned, and we'll be back soon.
Yeah, I'll just add that if you're just listening to this primer for the very first time, we're open to comments, suggestions, feedback, thoughts, and topics for future episodes as well, now that you know what we're talking about.
Yeah, there will of course be a meta page, like with everything that you won't be able to find when you search for it, but you can definitely like also leave suggestions on the meta page that you'll also find in the show notes. So Yop, is there anything else you would like to say before we finish?
No, that's it. It's a wrap.
Great.
Thank you, Philip.
Great.
This has been exciting.
Yeah, thank you, Yop. It was quite fun. And just to at the very end, well, thanks for listening. And there's a license attribution that of course you have to do because we are Wikimedia. And the Campfire sounds that you hear in the beginning and at the end are a file that you can find in Commons, that you'll find in the show notes. That was created by Glaneur the song, and it's under CC by 3.0. Okay. Then goodbye.
Goodbye.